Alex Morgan couldn't tear his eyes away from the screen. The strange symbols flashed across his monitor, pulsing with a rhythm that felt almost alive. For 3 weeks, he had barely slept, consumed by the alien transmission that had shocked the scientific community. "They're definitely trying to communicate," he muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. The signals had arrived 6 months ago. Radio telescopes across Earth had picked up the patterns simultaneously. Too precise, too structured to be anything but artificial. Humanity had finally received confirmation they weren't alone in the universe. The Caldari, as they called themselves, had made contact from a star system 40 light-years away. Their first messages contained mathematical sequences, atomic structures, and eventually, visual representations of themselves. Tall, slender beings with iridescent skin and 4 arms. Alex was one of the top linguists at Berkeley when the United Nations formed the Interstellar Communication Initiative. His specialty in pattern recognition and language evolution made him a natural choice for the team. Now he sat in a government facility, surrounded by the brightest minds on the planet, all working frantically to decipher the alien language. "You need to sleep," said Olivia, placing a coffee beside him. As the team's xenobiologist, she helped provide context for the cultural references they encountered. "I'm close to something," Alex insisted. "Their sentence structure has inconsistencies that don't make sense unless—" His thought remained unfinished as the facility director entered the room. "The Caldari delegation will arrive in orbit tomorrow," announced Director Patricia Wilson. "We need our communication protocols finalized today." The team buzzed with nervous energy. After months of message exchanges, the Caldari had agreed to a face-to-face meeting. Their ship had been traveling toward Earth for weeks. The next day, Alex joined 5 other specialists aboard the space station that would host the historic encounter. Through the viewport, he watched in awe as the Caldari vessel approached, a gleaming construct of impossible geometries that seemed to bend light around it. When the airlock finally opened, Alex held his breath. 4 Caldari representatives glided into the chamber. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, their movements fluid and precise. Their 4 arms ended in 7-fingered hands, and their faces featured large, multifaceted eyes that shimmered with intelligence. The lead human diplomat stepped forward with a warm smile. "On behalf of humanity, welcome to Earth." The translation device projected their carefully practiced greeting in the Caldari language, a series of clicks, whistles, and tonal shifts they had constructed from the transmissions. The tallest Caldari responded, the translation coming through the humans' earpieces. "We acknowledge your greeting, younger species." Something in the tone made Alex frown. Despite the neutral words, he sensed condescension. As the meeting progressed, the Caldari representatives answered questions with minimal information. They spoke of their advanced civilization spanning multiple systems, but offered no technological insights or meaningful cultural exchange. When asked about potential trade or alliance, the lead Caldari made a gesture that their translation system identified as amusement or dismissal. "Your species has only recently mastered basic spaceflight, perhaps in several centuries. You may be ready for meaningful interaction." The human delegation tried to hide their disappointment. This wasn't the momentous exchange of knowledge they had hoped for, but rather a cursory inspection of a primitive civilization. Later, reviewing recordings of the meeting, Alex noticed something strange. Certain ceremonial phrases the Caldari used contained phonetic elements completely outside their established linguistic patterns. "They're using words they don't fully understand," he whispered to himself, "like Latin in our scientific terms, or ancient rituals performed by rote." He pulled up the original transmissions, comparing them to historical language evolution models. A pattern began to emerge, one that suggested the modern Caldari language was a simplified derivative of something far more complex. Their ancestors spoke differently, Alex realized. Excitement building. "And I think I can figure out how." Alex paced the length of the research lab, surrounded by holographic projections of Caldari text. 3 days had passed since the disappointing first contact, but he hadn't left the facility once. Something about those linguistic anomalies had captured his full attention. "Look at this," he said to Olivia, who was analyzing biological data from the brief encounter. "These ceremonial phrases they use don't follow their grammatical rules." He pointed to several examples floating in the air between them. "It's like when we say per annum or etc., words from an older language preserved in modern speech." Olivia moved closer to examine his findings. "You think their current language evolved from something else?" "Not just evolved," Alex replied, eyes bright with discovery. "I think it was deliberately simplified." He pulled up comparison charts showing the complexity reduction between the ceremonial phrases and everyday Kildare speech. The difference was striking. The older forms use more sounds, more tonal variations, and significantly more complex grammatical structures. "I call it ancestral speech," Alex explained, "and I believe it might be the key to understanding their culture." Word of Alex's theory spread quickly through the ICI team. Jack Bennett, their government liaison, arranged an emergency meeting with the UN Security Council to secure additional funding. "If Morgan is right," Jack told the assembled officials, "this could completely change our approach to Kildare relations." Meanwhile, Olivia made her own breakthrough. While examining Kildare cultural transmissions, she discovered references to sacred texts kept in archives on Nexus 7, one of their colonial moons. "The Kildare maintain what they call memory temples on several worlds," she reported. "According to their public broadcasts, these contain historical records dating back thousands of years." The team gathered in the conference room to discuss their findings. Director Wilson looked skeptical but intrigued. "So you believe the modern Kildare don't fully understand their ancestral language?" she asked. Alex nodded eagerly. "I think there was a cultural shift, perhaps technological or political, that led to language simplification. The complex original language appears preserved only in ceremonial contexts and ancient texts. But why would an advanced civilization abandon their language?" asked Dr. Peter Collins, the team's cultural anthropologist. "Efficiency, perhaps," Alex suggested, "or control. Throughout human history, complex knowledge systems have been simplified or restricted to maintain power structures." Director Wilson tapped her fingers on the table, considering the implications. "You're suggesting we might learn their ancestral language better than they know it themselves." "Exactly," Alex confirmed. "And based on their reaction during first contact, they clearly value their history and traditions. If we approach them with knowledge of their linguistic heritage." Jack interrupted with practical concerns. "The Kildare have already left our solar system. They made it clear they consider us primitive. How do we test this theory?" Olivia pulled up a star chart. "Nexus 7. If their archives contain ancient texts, we might find enough material to reconstruct the ancestral speech." "You want to send a mission to their colony?" Director Wilson asked incredulously. "They didn't forbid it," Jack pointed out. "They simply deemed us unworthy of their attention." "There's a difference." The room fell silent as everyone considered the boldness of such a move. Finally, Alex spoke. "I believe their dismissal of us stems from cultural arrogance, not actual threat assessment. If we approach respectfully, seeking knowledge, we might find allies among their scholars." After hours of debate, Director Wilson made her decision. "I'll propose the mission to the Security Council. Mr. Bennett, prepare the diplomatic paperwork. Dr. Morgan, assemble everything you need to continue your research off-world." As the meeting dispersed, Alex returned to his workstation. On his screen glowed a partial translation of what might be the oldest Kildare phrase they had encountered. Words that, according to his analysis, meant those who remember the old tongue hold the keys to our souls. The horizon cut silently through the darkness of space, its antimatter engines glowing softly against the star-speckled void. Inside, Alex stared out the viewport, watching as the distant sun of the Kildare home system grew gradually larger. After months of travel, they were finally approaching Nexus 7. Captain Samantha Powell floated into the observation deck, her movements practiced and efficient in the zero-gravity environment. "We're 20 hours from arrival," she informed Alex. "How's the translation interface coming along?" Alex gestured to the tablet in his hand. "Kevin's done amazing work. The device can now process and reproduce over 80% of the sound patterns we've identified in the ancestral speech." Kevin Martinez, the team's engineer, had spent the journey developing a vocal synthesizer capable of producing the complex tones and resonances of the ancient Caldari language. The device now hung around Alex's neck like a pendant, ready to transform his spoken words into sounds no human throat could naturally create. "Let's hope the Caldari officials are as accommodating in person as they were in their messages," Samantha said, her expression suggesting she expected otherwise. The diplomatic exchanges had been cool but not hostile. The Caldari government had granted the human vessel limited access to Nexus 7, describing the visit as a cultural education opportunity for an emerging species. The condescension was clear, but at least the door was open. 16 crew members made up the expedition, a mix of scientists, diplomats, and security personnel. Daniel Ross, their archaeologist, joined Alex and Samantha at the viewport. "I've been studying the satellite imagery," Daniel said excitedly. "The memory temple appears to be built into a mountain. The architecture is unlike anything on the main Caldari worlds, much older." When the Horizon finally achieved orbit around Nexus 7, they were greeted by a small Caldari vessel. The local administrator, a female Caldari named Zalith, transmitted their landing coordinates along with a list of restrictive protocols. "Remember," Samantha briefed the team before descent, "we're guests here. Follow their rules, stay respectful, and focus on the mission." The landing was smooth despite the moon's uneven gravity. As they disembarked onto the surface of Nexus 7, Alex felt his heart race. The sky above them was dominated by the massive gas giant the moon orbited, its swirling storms visible even in daylight. Zelith met them at the spaceport, her 4 arms held in a formal posture that Alex recognized from their research as indicating cautious tolerance. "Your presence is permitted for 14 planetary cycles," she stated through her translator. "Access is restricted to public areas and designated research facilities only." Daniel couldn't contain his enthusiasm when they were finally escorted to the memory temple. The massive structure was carved directly into a cliff face, its entrance flanked by towering statues of Caldari figures in poses of contemplation. "These carvings are at least 2,000 years old," he whispered to Alex. "Look at the stylistic differences from modern Caldari art." Inside, the temple opened into a vast chamber filled with crystal data storage units and physical manuscripts. A team of Caldari archivists watched the humans warily as they were permitted to view selected materials. Alex worked tirelessly, scanning text after text into their database. Each new sample confirmed his theory. The ancient language was mathematically more complex, with grammatical structures that suggested not just communication, but a way of perceiving reality itself. On their 3rd day, Kevin noticed something concerning. "Someone's been in our computer systems," he told Alex privately. "They're monitoring everything we download." That evening, returning to their quarters, Daniel took Alex aside. "I found something today. An inscription hidden behind a newer panel. I think it's a map to a restricted section of the temple." As they discussed this discovery, a shadow moved outside their window. Alex glimpsed a Caldari figure retreating quickly into the darkness. "We're being watched," he murmured to Daniel. "And I don't think all the Caldari are pleased we're here." Alex's fingers flew across the holographic keyboard as he cross-referenced the latest batch of temple inscriptions with his growing database. 7 days into their stay on Nexus 7, and the team had gathered more linguistic data than they had originally hoped for. "I need to show you something," Daniel whispered, sliding into the seat beside Alex. The archaeologist glanced nervously over his shoulder before placing a small data chip on the table. "I managed to scan the restricted chamber last night." Alex looked up sharply. "You went in there alone?" That's against protocol. Daniel nodded grimly. The Kildare are hiding something important. The chamber contains texts that appear to be from before their technological revolution. Handwritten manuscripts with complex illustrations. As they examined Daniel's scans, patterns began to emerge that connected dozens of linguistic fragments Alex had been struggling to understand. The ancient texts used a symbolic system that corresponded to thought patterns rather than just sounds, a language designed to convey multiple layers of meaning simultaneously. This is it. Alex breathed, his exhaustion forgotten. The key we've been looking for. At that moment, Emma Clark, their cultural historian, rushed into the research room. "We have a problem," she said urgently. "The local religious council is demanding we leave immediately. They're claiming we violated sacred protocols." Captain Powell called an emergency team meeting in their secured quarters. "They know we've accessed restricted information," she informed them. "Security Officer Ramirez detected surveillance devices in all our rooms. We need more time," Alex insisted. "I'm on the verge of a breakthrough." As the team debated their options, George Williams, their technical specialist, made a suggestion. "What if we demonstrate our knowledge of the ancestral speech? Show them we understand its significance." "That's too risky," Emma objected. "We don't know enough about their cultural taboos." But Alex was already pulling up his latest translation model. "Actually, I think I understand enough. Look at these patterns. The ancestral language wasn't just communication. It was their connection to their past and their understanding of the universe." He explained his theory. Centuries ago, the Kildare underwent a massive technological revolution. In their pursuit of efficiency, they had systematically simplified their language, stripping away the philosophical and spiritual dimensions that had once defined their civilization. Their modern language is like programming code, precise but limited, Alex explained. The ancestral speech connected concepts in ways that allowed for deeper understanding of reality. That night, Alex barely slept. He fed text after text into his algorithm, refining pronunciation patterns and grammatical structures. By morning, he had compiled enough of the language to attempt basic communication. Their breakthrough came unexpectedly. While examining a ceremonial text, Alex noticed that certain sound combinations triggered emotional responses in the Kildare archivists: widened eyes, stilled movements, and sometimes what appeared to be reverence. "They recognize these phrases at a deep level," he told Emma. "It's like hearing a lullaby from your childhood that you've forgotten but instantly recognize." The team's work was interrupted when Zalith arrived with a formal delegation. "Your presence is causing unrest," she announced coldly. "The Supreme Minister himself will arrive tomorrow to address this situation." After the Kildare left, Kevin approached Alex with his tablet. "I've enhanced your translation device. It can now reproduce 93% of the sound patterns we've identified." Alex nodded, his mind racing. The Supreme Minister's visit might be our only chance, if we can address him in the ancestral speech. "That's incredibly risky," Captain Powell warned. "If we offend them, we could trigger a diplomatic incident." "We're already in one," Alex replied grimly. "But I believe there's a faction among the Kildare who want this knowledge recovered. The observer outside our window the other night. They've been leaving us clues, not just spying on us." As the team prepared for the high-stakes meeting, George discovered that their computer systems had been compromised again. But this time, additional information had been added to their database. "Someone's helping us," Alex realized. "Someone wants us to succeed." The Grand Hall of the Memory Temple had been cleared of all regular activities for the arrival of Supreme Minister Thal. Alex and the human delegation stood rigidly on one side of the chamber, facing a line of Kildare officials dressed in elaborate ceremonial garments. The tension in the air was thick enough to touch. Supreme Minister Thal entered with a procession of guards. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his iridescent skin shifting between deep blue and purple hues. His 4 arms were adorned with metallic bands that caught the light as he moved. Unlike the other Kildare, he wore no translation device, forcing the humans to use theirs. I have interrupted important matters to address this situation. Fall began, his words translated into English for the human team. Your species was granted limited access as a courtesy. That courtesy has been abused. Captain Powell stepped forward. Supreme Minister, we apologize for any misunderstanding. Our mission is purely academic. Academic. Thal's multifaceted eyes flashed. You probe our most sacred archives. You gather data beyond your permission parameters. You meddle in matters you cannot comprehend. The minister turned to address the assembled Kildare officials. This is what comes from entertaining primitive species. They mistake tolerance for weakness. The translator rendered his words flatly, but his dismissive tone needed no interpretation. Several Kildare officials nodded in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable. With respect, Powell continued, we came seeking knowledge and understanding. Understanding. Thal interrupted again. Your species has barely mastered interstellar travel. You have no context for our civilization's achievements. He gestured dismissively with his upper arms. You will depart Nexus 7 immediately. Your research materials will be confiscated as a safeguard against cultural contamination. Alex felt his heart pounding. Months of work, the journey across 40 light years, everything they had discovered, all about to be lost. He glanced at his teammates, seeing the same dismay on their faces. In that moment, Alex made his decision. He stepped forward, drawing surprised looks from both humans and Kildare. Supreme Minister, he said, activating the translation device Kevin had enhanced. Then, instead of continuing in English, he spoke directly into the device in a sequence they had carefully reconstructed. The sounds that emerged were unlike anything a human could naturally produce. Complex harmonics, tonal shifts, and resonant frequencies that seemed to fill the chamber with vibration. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every Kildare in the room froze. The Supreme Minister's skin color shifted rapidly through shades of blue and white. What their research suggested indicated shock. Alex continued, speaking the ancient greeting formula they had discovered in the oldest texts, addressing Thal with honorifics, unused for centuries, but still embedded in cultural memory. When he finished, silence filled the hall. Several older Kildare had moved their forearms into positions of formal respect. Others looked confused or alarmed. Supreme Minister Thal stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Alex. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its contemptuous edge. Where did you learn the sacred cadence? He demanded. Before Alex could answer, an elderly Kildare stepped forward from the line of officials. Her skin had faded to a pale blue with age, and she wore simple robes compared to the others. The human speaks with the voice of the ancestors, she said, her words carrying obvious weight. This has not happened in 7 generations. Whispers erupted among the Kildare delegation. Thal raised his arms for silence, but the murmuring continued. This is a trick, he insisted, a manipulation of sounds without understanding. The elderly Kildare, whose insignia identified her as a high scholar, approached Alex. Speak again, she requested. Alex carefully pronounced another passage they had reconstructed, this one a philosophical statement about knowledge and wisdom transcending time. The high scholar turned to face Thal. This human understands the patterns of thought. The Council of Remembrance must be convened. Thal's skin darkened with what appeared to be anger, but he was clearly constrained by protocol. The humans will remain confined to their quarters until the Council determines their fate, he ordered before sweeping from the chamber. As the delegation was escorted back to their quarters, Alex noticed something remarkable. The Kildare guards were now treating them with cautious reverence rather than disdain. What did you just do? Captain Powell whispered. I think. Alex replied quietly. I just spoke words their ancestors have been waiting centuries to hear again. The Council of Remembrance met in a circular chamber deep within the memory temple. Alex and Dr. Lisa Myers, The team's anthropologist sat on specially provided seats facing 7 elderly Keldari arranged in a semicircle. The walls were lined with ancient inscriptions that glowed with a soft blue light. A high scholar who had spoken in Alex's defense during the confrontation with Thal sat at the center of the council. She had introduced herself as Elder Vrax, Keeper of Memories. For 5 centuries, the sacred cadence has been preserved but not understood. Elder Vrax began, her translator providing English for the humans, while Alex's device translated their responses into ancestral speech. How did your species recover what we ourselves have lost? Alex explained their linguistic research carefully, describing how they had analyzed patterns and reconstructed pronunciation from ceremonial phrases and ancient texts. Your modern language is elegant and precise, Alex said, but we noticed it lacked the resonant structures present in your historical records. It seemed deliberately simplified. The elders exchanged meaningful glances. One of them, his skin a deep purple with age, leaned forward. You are correct, he said gravely. During the Great Reformation, our ancestors chose efficiency over tradition. The complex language of our past was deemed unnecessarily contemplative. Lisa listened intently, taking careful notes as the elder continued. 500 years ago, our civilization faced resource challenges. A movement arose promoting technological solutions and rational efficiency. The reformers believed our ancient thinking patterns, embedded in our complex language, slowed progress. They simplified the language to change how your people thought, Lisa said, understanding dawning on her face. Elder Vrax nodded solemnly. The ancestral speech required contemplation. It connected concepts across time and space. The reformers created a new language focused on immediate utility. The elders explained that as generations passed, fewer and fewer Keldari could understand the ancient texts. The ancestral speech became ceremonial, then mysterious, and finally almost forgotten. Only the Council of Remembrance preserved fragments of pronunciation and meaning. Yet you humans, with no connection to our past, have recovered what we lost, another elder said, her tone a mixture of wonder and shame. Security Officer John Davis, who had been quietly observing from near the door, asked the question that had been bothering the human team. Why did Supreme Minister Thal react with such hostility? The elders fell silent, exchanging glances. Finally, Elder Vrax spoke. The current government sees the past as primitive. They believe embracing ancient wisdom would weaken our technological superiority. They tolerate us as cultural symbols, but dismiss our knowledge as irrelevant. As they spoke, Alex began to understand the full significance of their discovery. The Keldari civilization had advanced technologically, but had deliberately severed its connection to its philosophical and spiritual roots. We have records suggesting your ancestral speech wasn't just communication, Alex said carefully. It appears to have been a tool for perception itself, a way of understanding reality. Elder Vrax's eyes brightened. Yes, the sacred cadence unified thought, emotion, and physical reality. It allowed our ancestors to perceive connections across what you might call dimensions of existence. One of the younger elders leaned forward. For centuries, we have preserved the forms without the substance. We speak sounds we do not truly understand during our most sacred ceremonies. As their discussion continued, Lissa noticed a subtle change in the chamber. More Keldari had entered quietly and were standing along the walls, listening intently. Some wore the insignia of scholars, others the simple garments of temple workers. Your arrival has caused a stir among our people, Elder Vrax explained, noticing Lisa's observation. Word has spread that humans speak the ancestral speech. Many who have questioned the Reformation's wisdom are finding courage to seek answers. John shifted uncomfortably. That sounds like we're becoming a political problem. More than political, Elder Vrax confirmed. You have become a focal point for tensions that have existed in our society for generations. The Supreme Minister sees you as a threat to stability. We didn't come here to cause a revolution, Alex said, concerned. Perhaps not, Elder Vrax replied, her skin shifting to a deep, thoughtful blue. "But sometimes knowledge itself is revolutionary. By recovering our lost speech, you have reminded us of who we once were, and what we might become again." As they left the chamber hours later, Alex noticed that the number of Kildare in the temple corridors had grown significantly. Many bowed their heads respectfully as the humans passed. "I think," Lisa whispered, "we just became much more than researchers." The next 3 days brought dramatic changes to Nexus 7. Kildare from across the colony arrived at the Memory Temple, drawn by rumors of humans who spoke the ancestral speech. Elder Vrax and her council worked closely with Alex and the research team, combining their knowledge to recover more of the ancient language. "The resonance patterns create neural connections that our modern speech cannot," Elder Vrax explained as they worked in the main archive chamber. "Each phrase activates ancestral memory pathways in our brains." Kevin had modified their translation devices further, enabling the entire human team to produce basic phrases in the ancestral speech. The effect on the Kildare was remarkable. Even simple greetings spoken in the ancient tongue evoked deep emotional responses. "It's like they're hearing music that touches something fundamental in their consciousness," Lisa observed. A growing number of Kildare openly defied Supreme Minister Thal's orders to avoid the humans. Young scholars especially sought out the team, bringing ancient texts from personal collections and family archives. What had begun as linguistic research was becoming a cultural movement. "The traditionalists have formed a protective circle around us," Captain Powell told Alex during their daily briefing. "But Thal's faction is gathering strength too. There are reports of military transports arriving from the homeworld." Alex's concern grew as he noticed Kildare security forces taking positions around the temple complex. "We need to accelerate our work," he told the team. "I don't think we have much time left." That night, Elder Vrax came to their quarters with urgency in her movements. "The Reformation Guard has been mobilized," she warned. "Thal plans to arrest the Council of Remembrance at dawn and confine your team for deportation." "We should return to our ship," Powell suggested. "We didn't come here to start a civil conflict." "It may be too late for that," Elder Vrax replied. "The conflict has existed for centuries beneath the surface. Your presence merely catalyzed what was inevitable." She placed a crystal data storage device on the table. "This contains the complete archives of ancestral knowledge, including technical specifications for systems that were abandoned during the Reformation." Alex studied the glowing crystal. "What do you want us to do with this?" "Help us reclaim our heritage," Elder Vrax said simply. "The ancestral speech contains command protocols that still exist within our most fundamental systems. The reformers never removed them, merely obscured them beneath newer interfaces." Their planning was interrupted by the temple's alarm system blaring to life. John Davis rushed into the room. "Armed forces are entering the temple complex. At least 30 soldiers with Thal at the lead." Powell immediately activated her communication device. "All personnel, prepare for emergency evacuation. Proceed to extraction point Beta." But Elder Vrax raised her hand. "There is another way, if you trust me." She led them through hidden passages beneath the temple to a chamber unlike any they had seen before. The walls were covered with intricate circuits that pulsed with light, and at the center stood a crystalline structure that resembled a tree. "This is a Nexus node, one of the original communication systems from before the Reformation," Elder Vrax explained. "It connects to every Kildare system across our colonies." Kevin examined the technology with amazement. "This is far more advanced than anything we've seen in current Kildare tech." "The Reformation didn't advance our technology," Elder Vrax said sadly. "In many ways, it regressed it to make it more controllable." She turned to Alex. "The node responds to vocal commands in ancestral speech. With your help, we can activate protocols that have been dormant for centuries." From above, they heard the sounds of confrontation as Thal's forces clashed with the traditionalist Kildare defending the temple. "What exactly will this do?" Alex asked, eyeing the crystal structure nervously. "It will remind our people who they truly are," Elder Vrax replied. With Elder Vrax's guidance, Alex stood before the node and began to speak in the most complex ancestral speech patterns they had reconstructed. The crystal structure responded immediately, its lights pulsing in harmony with his words. Throughout the temple complex, ancient systems hidden within the walls awakened. Dormant interfaces glowed to life, and forgotten protocols activated across the communication network of Nexus 7. As Thal and his guards broke through to the lower chambers, they stopped in shock. Every surface of the temple was now illuminated with ancient script, and a harmonious tone resonated through the entire structure. By authority of the central government, I order you to cease this activity, Thal demanded, his skin darkening with rage. Elder Vrax stepped forward, her frail body suddenly seeming stronger in the light of the activated systems. The temple recognizes these humans as knowledge-bearers, she announced. By the oldest laws of our people, they stand under the protection of the ancestors. To everyone's astonishment, the temple's automated systems responded to her words. Energy fields shimmered into existence, separating Thal's forces from the humans and their Keldari allies. The Supreme Minister stared in disbelief at technology he had never known existed within the ancient structure. This changes nothing, he insisted, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. It changes everything. Elder Vrax replied calmly. The message is already spreading across all Keldari worlds. The ancestral voice has returned. 3 weeks after the confrontation in the Memory Temple, Alex stood on the observation deck of the horizon, watching a shuttlecraft move between the ship and the surface of Nexus 7. What had begun as a research mission had transformed into something far more significant. The last of the technical exchange teams has arrived, Captain Powell informed him as she entered the deck. The Keldari engineers are eager to begin the collaborative work. The attempted coup by Supreme Minister Thal had collapsed within hours of the temple activation. Throughout the Keldari colonies, ancient systems had awakened, responding to commands in the ancestral speech, broadcast from Nexus 7. Security protocols embedded in their technology had recognized the humans as knowledge-bearers, a designation from Keldari prehistory that granted them protected status. I still can't believe how quickly everything changed, Alex said, shaking his head in wonder. The political upheaval had been swift but remarkably peaceful. When the automated systems responded to the ancestral speech, many of Thal's supporters had immediately abandoned him. The cultural impact of hearing the ancient language spoken properly after centuries had overwhelmed political loyalties. Elder Vrax says the Interim Council will formalize the alliance treaty tomorrow, Powell replied. The technical exchange program is just the beginning. In the aftermath, the Keldari had formed a new governing body that included both traditionalists and progressive thinkers. Their first official act had been to propose a formal alliance with Earth, offering advanced technology in exchange for continued help recovering their linguistic and cultural heritage. Alex turned as Lisa Myers joined them at the viewport. The cultural teams are setting up the first education centers, she reported. Young Keldari are particularly receptive to learning the ancestral speech. And how are they responding to human teachers? Powell asked. Lisa smiled. They're fascinated by us. The idea that an alien species preserved knowledge they themselves had lost seems to have fundamentally changed their perception of humanity's place in the galaxy. The 3 of them watched as a Keldari transport ship departed the moon, headed for Earth with the first diplomatic delegation. On board were scholars, engineers, and cultural ambassadors, the vanguard of what promised to be a productive interspecies relationship. We've been invited to the ceremony tonight, Lisa reminded them. Elder Vrax will officially recognize you as Voice of Ancestors, Alex. Alex felt a mixture of pride and humility at the title. I still feel like we stumbled onto this by accident. Sometimes the greatest discoveries happen that way, Powell replied. The Keldari spent centuries trying to bury their past beneath efficiency and technological progress. Perhaps it took outsiders to show them what they'd lost. That evening, in the grand chamber of the Memory Temple, Alex stood before the assembled Caldari Council. The room was filled with representatives from across their colonies, many of whom had traveled for days to witness the ceremony. Elder Vrax, now head of the interim council, addressed the gathering first in modern Caldari, then switched to the ancestral speech. The complex sounds filled the chamber, creating harmonics that seemed to resonate with the very walls. "For generations, we lost our way," she said, while Alex listened through his translator. "We sacrificed wisdom for efficiency, connection for progress. Today, we begin to reclaim the balance our ancestors understood." She turned to the human delegation. These visitors from a distant world came seeking knowledge. Instead, they returned to us knowledge we have forgotten. They reminded us that true advancement comes not from abandoning our past, but from building upon its foundations. As part of the ceremony, Alex was asked to speak the ancestral phrase that had first activated the temple systems. The words flowed more naturally now after weeks of practice, and the Caldari in attendance responded with a soft harmonic hum that filled the chamber. Afterward, as the formal proceedings gave way to celebration, Kevin approached Alex with his data tablet. "Look at this," he said excitedly. "The Caldari have shared specifications for their antimatter drive technology. This could revolutionize our space exploration capabilities. And in exchange, we're teaching them to speak their own language," Alex mused. "It seems like an uneven trade." "Not to them," Lisa said, joining the conversation. Elder Vrax explained that without the ancestral speech, much of their advanced technology was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. They understood the mechanics but had lost the philosophical framework that made true innovation possible. As the celebration continued around them, Alex received a message from Earth. The UN Security Council had approved plans for a permanent human presence on Nexus 7 and a Caldari embassy on Earth. "We came looking for a way to communicate with aliens," Alex said to his friends, and ended up helping them communicate with themselves. Outside the temple, the news was spreading across the galaxy. Other spacefaring species were already requesting information about the Earth-Caldari alliance. The message was clear. Humanity might be newcomers to interstellar society, but they had proven themselves to be something unexpected, not just explorers or diplomats, but preservers of wisdom that transcended the stars.